Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Courtside with Beilinson Tennis, part of the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. We have with us again my co-host and Hall of Famer, Steve Flink. I'm smiling, Steve, because this was quite a week, and we got quite a bit to talk about, and I know you're fired up. You're ready to go, so let's get started, huh?
Sure, let's do it.
The big news, and we have to start with, and we could do a whole episode on this topic alone. We're not, but we could, is the news from Serena Williams earlier in the week. Now, you notice she never used the retirement word. I think she used the evolving type of the term. You know, it's interesting. She also didn't say she would specifically retire after the U.S. Open. She never used those words too. I think that's assumed. But you were there for so many of her big matches, especially the ones in New York. I mean, the numbers are staggering, right? 23 majors, singles titles, held all four majors twice. She never did it in 1 year, which we know is so hard to do. But she had all four majors twice at one time, 2002 to 2003 and 2014 and 2015. 365 wins in majors, 319 weeks at number one. Her first slam was at the 1999 U.S. Open before her older sister, Venus, won her first slam at Wimbledon. I'll leave it up to you, Steve. I mean, again, we could talk about Serena forever.
Well, listen, all those statistics, everything you just mentioned is bears proof to the fact that she's one of the greatest of all time, no doubt, and that she's clearly in the conversation for the greatest of all time. And she deserves all the accolades she's getting right now, because you think about how she won her first major in 1999 at the U.S. Open. It's only 17 years old, and then she won her most recent one at the 2017 Australian. So almost a full 18-year gap between those, and still in the finals of Wimbledon and the Open in 2018 and 19. So the longevity is very impressive. The fact that she won the 23 majors, surpassed Steffi, looks like she's going to fall one short of Margaret Court. All of that, nothing to be taken away from her. It's just a spectacular career. All I would add, David, is that I don't agree with those that automatically accord her greatest of all time. And a lot of people in the media and on television were doing this by the time 2014, 15. They reached a certain stage where it was sort of assumed, and then once she passed Steffi, then it became even more automatic. I'm still assessing it, to tell you the truth, because I still believe that Graf and Navratilova. I always felt that Steffi was the greatest, slightly ahead of Martina. And then
now, Steffi had the calendar Grand Slam in 1988.
Yeah, she had this calendar Grand Slam, not to mention winning the Olympics that year for Golden Slams. And Serena came. This is what would have really helped Serena, David, if in 2000, you mentioned those years of 2014 and 15. In 15, she came to the U.S. Open.
Yep.
She's got the first three. It's just like Novak in a sense last year, except he got one round further. And Serena got to the semis, and she's playing Roberta Vinci, who was a really guyful Italian. She chipped and charged. She mixed things up. She's
gave her no pace at all.
Yeah, no pace. And, she played a really smart match. However, if Serena's feet had not been frozen, I mean, you could clearly see that, and understandably, just like with Novak in the finals against Medvedev last year, that, it's pretty hard to get that accomplishment out of your mind, to just play it as a match and take those thoughts out of your mind. And I felt like it got to her, and Serena had won the first set, and she also led 2-love with a game point for 3-love in that third set. Who's she going to play in the final? Flavia Pennetta, another Italian, who had upset Halep. So it was set up for her. I don't mean set up like it was easy or that she didn't earn it, but it looked like she was poised to do it when she took the lead against Vinci, and she couldn't finish it off. Had she done that, then I think the assessment that would have given her, put her on level ground with Steffi by winning a Grand Slam, and then you might say, okay, the inconsistencies can be forgiven. But my point being that for long spans, Navratilova, for instance, went 5 years, David, and lost 14 matches in 5 years, won 70 of 84 tournaments in that span from 82 to 86. So for a 5-year span, that's the greatest I've seen for somebody at their peak, the most invincible, unbeatable. Steffi had similarly great years, won the Grand Slam. They each were number one in the world 7, 8 years about. Serena's not going to match that. So when it comes to consistency, and it's not all her fault, she had things going on in her private life, health issues and things in her family that diverted her from the game at times. And then she came back strong, all to her credit. But there were definitely years where she did not, perform well and almost slipping out of the top 100. And then she'd make her way back. Injuries contributed to it, no doubt. I'm just saying both Graf and Navratilova were immensely consistent. Steffi, almost from the beginning to end of her career. Martina, early in her career, had some somewhat inconsistent at times, but that passed in a hurry. And by the time she won her first Wimbledon in 78, right on through to, 94 and what amounted to her retirement, she made a brief belated comeback attempt later. She was incredibly consistent too. So I believe they should not be ignored, is my point, when we look at especially at the great modern players. And of course, we can't ignore, David. People tend to just want to forget the likes of Helen Wills Moody and Suzanne Lenglen and Little Mo Connolly, who won the Grand Slam herself in 53. And I mean, it's very hard to compare eras going that far back, but they're all prodigious players who don't deserve to be ignored either. When it comes to open era, modern, I believe that there should be an honest debate about all these people, that it shouldn't just be Serena shouldn't just be crowned automatically. She's definitely in there to be considered, no doubt about it.
And she won her last slam. And when she won the Australian in 2017, was she like 2 months pregnant, right?
Yeah.
2 months pregnant. I mean, amazing.
Phenomenal. And then comes back from the pregnancy. And in 2018 and 19, she's in the finals of Wimbledon. Again, if she could have won one of those and tied Margaret, that also would have helped. So I'm just saying to me, it's a fascinating debate. And I don't want to diminish anything she's done, because I think you can also make the argument, David, that at her very best, just put them in a time capsule at their very best. I think I'd probably go with her certainly on hard courts or grass. Not necessarily.
I would love to see a Steffi Graf at their peak. Steffi Graf, because Steffi's quickness, and her own power in her own right. Steffi versus Serena at both their peaks would have been.
It'd be great. Now we got a glimpse, David, sort of similar to the glimpse we got with Roger Federer and Pete Sampras at the 01 Wimbledon, 7-5 in the fifth to the young Roger over Pete in the round of 16. We got something of that sense of that when Steffi lost to Serena in Indian Wells 7-5 in the third in the finals in 99. She's now in her last year. Even though she won the French that year, you could argue she's still slightly past her prime. Serena's not. And Serena's not yet at her prime, even though she goes on and wins the U.S. Open later in the year. So it just was an interesting intersection that they would meet then, because Steffi went on to win the French not long after Indian Wells, and Serena wins the U.S. Open. Yeah. And they had a dandy of a match. But obviously, you can't put too much stock in that, just like you can't put too much stock in Roger and Pete, considering where they were in their respective careers at the time. But I agree with you. I think it would have been, I just can only imagine what a series of matches would have been like. I have to say, if you put them on the 10-match series, on hard clay, grass, I definitely would give Steffi the edge on clay. Yeah. The question would come down to, could she contain Serena on the grass and the hard courts? Could she win enough of those? That I have to think about. But I would say I would like her chances on the clay with her speed and her precision and her, and Serena improved tremendously as a clay court player, especially after Patrick Mouratoglou came into the picture. But I would still take Steffi on the dirt.
Amazing. And yeah, that would be fun. That's part of the fun, have conversations about comparing different type of eras. Again, especially envisioning people at their peaks in different eras, how they would have matched up. It would have been fascinating to watch.
But David, just a quick final comment. I want to say this about Serena. I think what she's doing is wise. I hope that she plays the Open and maybe she can get through a few rounds. It'd be nice for her to soak in some applause in New York, and the crowds will be sentimental, and they should be. And then I do hope somewhere in the fall, I hope that is her last major and maybe even her last tournament, because I think it is the right time. She's going to be approaching 41 here, and it's asking a lot of herself. And she's had these long absences with being hurt. And it's just, I don't want to see her going on losing to players that shouldn't be beating her, is my point. I think it would be a wise time to step aside.
And regardless what happens in New York, that New York crowd is going to send her off with a proper send off. I mean, it's going to be, I think they sold, I'm going to screw up the numbers here, but they sold a huge amount of tickets as soon as that article was released on social media. I don't want to name a number because I can't remember off the top of that and I'm going to screw it up, but the ticket sales skyrocketed as soon as that article came out.
Well, what's interesting about that, David, is you just wonder how many of those tickets were bought for the first 3, 4, 5 days, because they can't count on Serena being around the second week. If she is terrific, it's a bonus. I suspect it's just when the USTA would want the ticket buying to occur, because it's the first week that you maybe your sales are not as big as the second week. So it's exciting, and I think she'll clarify. Certainly, I think she'll clarify some things once the tournament ends for her, whenever that is, about what her plans are. At that point, I think she'll be very clear on what her intentions are.
Well said, Steve. And I'll just end with this. I mean, what she's done not only for the sport of tennis, but for women's sports in general and women in general. I mean, she's moved the needle, Steve. She really has moved the needle in a good way, and her accomplishments speak for themselves. And we're going to miss her, but maybe somehow she'll stay involved in the sport. She's a role model for a lot of athletes out there, and we wish her nothing but the best of luck going forward.
And just a last comment, David, she also had to overcome this sort of psychological barrier of her sister, who was a great player. We forget it too quickly. And Venus, with her 7 majors and her 5 Wimbledons and 2 US Opens, and Venus was better earlier on, obviously, and then Serena turned the corner and surpassed her. And I don't think she enjoyed that necessarily, but she had to come to terms with the idea that Venus was somebody she had to beat. She had to treat Venus like any other great rival. And I think that she did a commendable job in that aspect as well.
And it was interesting for Venus because, like you said, Venus was the first one out there and was better than her sister starting out, but Serena won the first slam between the two. So
yeah, and I'll never forget the look on Venus's face. You could see the conflict when she watched the final. She had lost to Hingis, and now it's Serena against Hingis, and obviously she wants Serena to win. But you could almost feel like Venus was so disappointed not to be out there herself. On the other hand, she really urged her sister on, and that continued to be the case throughout their careers. There was something very moving to me about that, the way that the supportiveness they had for each other.
Well, for those that have not seen the movie King Richard, go definitely see it, because it paints a story of how Richard Williams coached these 2 champions to greatness. It's not what you would normally expect how to train tennis champions. Maybe that's why they were as successful as they were. Go check it out. Great movie. I'm sure a lot of the tennis fans have already seen it, but if you haven't, again, King Richard, check it out. Okay, again, we could talk about, Serena and the Williams family all day. Let's move on to Nick Kyrgios, who, arguably is the hottest player on the men's tour as we speak right now. We had CC Bellis on as a guest last week, so we really didn't talk about the conclusion of City Open in Washington, D.C. Nick won not only just the singles, he won the doubles with Jack Sock. Great week. Nick continued to play well in Montreal. He's now played a lot of tennis. Played Daniil Medvedev. What does he do? He beats Daniil Medvedev in 3 sets. I think he ran out of gas yesterday. We're recording this on Saturday. He ran out of gas yesterday playing Hurkacz. Nothing to be embarrassed about at all. Nick has played tremendous tennis. He is now going to be seated in New York. That happened, so we'll see how that draw eventually comes out. But
and let's
Nick
face
has
it,
been playing great.
As you mentioned, him being the hottest player in the game, it really started with that swing pre-Wimbledon, the grass court circuit, where he's very consistent. Then the final of Wimbledon, and then the win in Washington, as you mentioned. But he lost out on 1,200 points at Wimbledon.
I know.
Just as Novak, for winning it, lost out on 2,000. Well, for Nick's case, that would have made a big difference. He'd be close to the top 10 now. But as far as Hurkacz is concerned, it was an understandable loss, David. You mentioned it. The fatigue set in, to be sure, but it's also a tough matchup. He lost to him. I don't know whether you saw the semis of Halle not long ago, back in June, pre-Wimbledon, 7-6 in the third to Hurkacz, and it was a really well-played match, just as yesterday was. and it's really come down to a lot of tie breaks between those two in the last couple of matches. And Hubie serves so well that Nick has real problems trying to break him. But it was still a very good effort to follow up DC with a quarterfinal showing in Canada. And as we speak now, he's still in the draw at Cincinnati. So he might be able to do push his ranking up even a little bit more with a good Cincinnati. And I think he's going to come into the Open really raring to go and a genuine threat. And it wouldn't shock me if we saw him around on the final day of the Open, just as we did at Wimbledon.
Yeah, no one's going to want to face him in New York, especially early on. I agree with you 100%. It was weird because I thought when he won City, I thought there was a chance he would skip Montreal and prepare for Cincy, then take that extra week off and then go to New York. He didn't. Him losing to Hurkacz, it would be interesting if Nick went to the semis or finals of Montreal. What would he do with Cincy then? But I think because he lost yesterday, he's going to have a couple days. They may not play him till Tuesday or Wednesday. He'll have some days off. So I think he does play Cincy.
No, you're echoing my thoughts. I just had a discussion with a good friend of mine yesterday, Brad Faulkner, former employee of the Tennis Channel, good guy. And Brad, and I was saying exactly that to him, that I thought, no, he's going to have enough days off. He loses on Friday. He gets Saturday, Sunday off. He's practicing in Cincinnati on Monday. And they wouldn't have to play him before Tuesday. And I think he'd be okay by then. And to me, it's a good sign, David. He did have one injury before Wimbledon, but then he looked pretty healthy for most of Wimbledon. Now here he is strong on the hard court circuit. So his body is holding up better than it has for a long time.
Yeah.
Now I do wish we could get a little less of the banner with his entourage. He still has an obsession with that, and I think I don't think it does him any good. I know he wants to vent, but it doesn't do him any good. However, all told, he handled himself pretty well this week and in DC as well, in addition. So things are pretty encouraging for his camp. And to think that we all thought that maybe the brilliance of Nick Kyrgios was going to become totally wasted. And here he has had this astonishing resurgence here in 2022, and I'm glad to see it.
Yeah, we all wondered. I put this on Twitter about 2 weeks ago. We all wondered what it would look like, the total package when he put it all together, and we're seeing it pretty damn clear right now. I mean, the talent is just off the charts. So again, if the motivation stays there, he stays healthy, he's going to be extremely dangerous in New York. So,
I mean, imagine we don't know the draw yet, but imagine, for instance, after what we saw at Indian Wells early in the year and some of the great matches they've had through the years, if we got Rafa and Nick in the quarters and in a night match in New York in the quarters, as an example. I mean, that's pretty mouthwatering, to say the least.
100,000% agree. Another player I want to talk about, and there's a couple aspects to this, and I'm so high on this player, and so many people, especially American tennis fans, are high on this player too. He's had a great run here. There's a couple things I want to hit on, and that's Tommy Paul. And Tommy Paul had a great week in Montreal. He really did. We talk about the quarterfinal against Ivashka in Atlanta, and we're going to hit on that in my second point. He then plays Nick in Washington, D.C., loses, right? Tough draw. He then plays Alcaraz in the very next tournament in Montreal, right? So he played Ivashka in Atlanta, Nick in D.C., actually, and then Alcaraz in Montreal. I mean, tough draws. The match against Alcaraz, it was interesting because Tommy, I thought, played really, really well. That third set, Tommy was up 5-2, Steve, and Alcaraz was serving. Alcaraz was down 15-40. Both of them played two incredible points. Alcaraz won them both. So we saved 2 match points. Alcaraz saved a third and a fourth match point to hold at 3-5. Tommy's serving at 30-all. I don't know if Tommy ever had a break point. If Alcaraz ever had a break point on him, but Tommy, if Alcaraz wins that game, I think Alcaraz wins the next game, all the rest of the games of the match.
Yeah, no, actually,
Tommy was able to hold.
I think Tommy come to think, I think he actually saved a break point.
He saved a break point.
And that's typical of Carlos, by the way, to come back at you at the end like that. That made it even all the more commendable that Tommy could finish off the kid after what happened at the end.
What a tough hold. What a pressure tough hold to have at 5-3 after you've had 4 match points.
No, it's not, and it wasn't easy. And he also saved a match point in the tiebreak in the second set, which was very gritty. He came from way down, 4-1 down the second set. That usually Alcaraz is better at closing out matches, but again, that had a lot to do with Tommy's level of aggression, how he just would not back off in that match. And it was actually quite a high quality. There was a lot of big hitting in that match and a lot of first class tennis. So, and then he ends up beating Cilic, and unfortunately, he fell short. I was a little disappointed about the loss to Dan Evans. I
came
thought
out on fire. Came out on fire. 6-1.
Yeah, 6-1 first set, and he ends up losing in 3, which was a golden opportunity there to be in the semis and maybe even go on to the finals or perhaps win it. And that's not a match I thought going in he would lose. I'm sure that he was well prepared psychologically for it. And he knows that Evans is a consummate professional, but I still was disappointed that after that kind of a start, that he couldn't wrap up that win and get to the semis.
So let me continue on that trend, because you kind of hit on my second point. So we talked about his run in Atlanta. He lost in the quarters to Ivashka, right? Ivashka's in the qualies of Cincy right now. Last night, again, we're recording this on Saturday. Last night, he played the quarters against Dan Evans. Dan Evans can be very dangerous. Dan Evans was unseeded. Evans beat Fritz the night before. Dan Evans is playing well. And again, the match last night between Evans and Tommy Paul, it was incredible shot making from both. There was some really, really good points between them. Here's my frustration, and I guess my frustration is just being an American tennis fan trying to get these guys closer and closer to the finish line. Take last night's tournament. Take last night's match, for instance. You're in a Masters 1000, Steve. You have a quarterfinal opponent of Dan Evans. When you're in a Masters 1000 quarterfinal, who are you going to get that is a lesser known player than Dan Evans? You're not. At these stages of these big Masters 1000s, you're going to have a very, very good player. You mentioned it earlier. This was an opportunity to make semis of a Masters 1000. You have to somehow get through
I think so.
Matches.
I think so, David, and I share your frustration and your consternation, because you do want to see him, make that stride. You want to see him cross that barrier. However, I do think he's, Brad Stein, his coach, is so sensible and so smart and so
great coach. Great.
Yeah, he understands the game as well as anybody, and he used to work with Jim Courier in the old days. He's worked with a whole host of players. He'll help him through this. I think the important thing is that there's always another tournament around the corner. At some point of, a couple of years back, last year before, the big thing was I want to win a tournament. He finally did that. He's already made a lot of progress, and yes, it's frustrating, and that could have meant a lot of points to move on to the semis and perhaps even the final. But the good news is he still got those quarterfinal points, and you keep going, and maybe in New York with the American crowds, who knows? Maybe that's where he gets on a run and he's in a big quarterfinal and he gets through it. So I'm not totally discouraged, and I do think he'll learn from it. And it's just sad in a way, because I believe that his game, I think he should have been able to take care of Dan. I mean, Evans is a tricky opponent with a slice backhand and mixes things up very well. Great competitor, but I thought Tommy would be up to the job.
And again, I think I'm probably trying to rush it a little bit. First of all, Tommy is nowhere near his ceiling yet. He's still going to get better. I'm just looking at more so Tommy's opponent than the round itself. When you're in the quarterfinal and you get an opponent that's not seeded, generally in these Masters 1000, you're going to get a heck of an opponent. Not to disrespect Dan, but these are opportunities that don't come every week. But like you said, each week's a different opportunity, and his ceiling is not. He hasn't come close to hitting his ceiling yet. We're all excited to see what Tommy can do in the next few years, for sure.
And listen, don't think for a second, David, that Stein is not talking to him about that. He's not aware that there were some inner struggles going on there, that maybe after Tommy wins the first set, he's actually thinking about those points. He's thinking about being in the semis. You can almost be too aware, too conscious of those things. And I'm sure they'll talk about how to get around that. I mean, it's when he's playing Carlos, okay, it's early in the tournament. You just start, let's just see if we can beat Carlos. But then by the time he got to play the Evans match, he was in a different mindset and realized with the players left in the field that there were some real possibilities some great possibilities for him, and it's hard to get that, to wipe that out of your mind.
This was a huge week for him, Tommy, because Steve, if he loses to Ivashka in Atlanta, Kyrgios in Washington, D.C., and then Alcaraz in Montreal, he's on a 3-match losing streak. Again, he's got terrible draws the last 2 tournaments, but for confidence-wise, this was a monster week. Yes, we wish he would have gotten through his quarter last night, but this was a big, big week for Tommy.
Oh yeah, I think he'll recognize that as well, as will Stein, and he'll say, look, this was a good step in the right direction. Let's go from here. And he really had it. It does astound me how much his game has improved in the last year. I mean, he's just not the same player.
Before we go on to the next player, and we're going to talk about Coco in a minute, but one question. Carlos, yeah, he had a tough draw. He played Tommy, right? Did Carlos, those 2 clay court tournaments that Carlos played, do you think that played a factor into how he played against Tommy? This was his first hard court tournament after Wimbledon, and then after those 2 clay court tournaments.
I think it did. I think it did. And I think he's in somewhat of a, I'm not going to call it a downward spiral because it's not, but I do think he's psychologically, he's been hit hard. A lot of people thought he'd win the French, and Zverev outplayed him there in the quarters, and then everybody thought, oh man, maybe he can do something at Wimbledon. Sinner got him there. Sinner got him in one of the clay court finals. He lost the other to Sonego. So he's still playing really well, but I think he just is kind of, I think the Carlos of that period leading up to the French wouldn't have lost the Tommy Paul match from a set in 4-1. I think he would have closed it. So I think there's just a little lack of confidence right now, and it was the surface transition that you mentioned. But I expect him to sort of bounce back strong in Cincinnati and then be ready to make a deep run at the U.S. Open. And
if he can get some matches in Cincinnati, he'll be totally ready to roll.
Oh yeah, no, that'll make a big difference. And he's so dangerous in New York, and he loves playing the majors now, and he remembers so well beating Tsitsipas at the U.S. Open a year ago, making his first big run at a major. And so I think that'll bring back great memories. And now he's come so far since then. So it'll be really interesting. I do hope that he's at least in the quarters or semis at Cincinnati. That'll help.
For sure. Okay, Coco Gauff, great week up in Toronto. She won 2 matches. Back-to-back 7-6 in the third. I felt this was the first tournament in a while that I saw her really going after her forehand, being more aggressive and assertive on her forehand. Here's the thing. When you look at her stat lines when she wins, like against Rybakina when she won 7-6 in the third. Rybakina. 23 winners and 52 unforced errors, Steve. She wound up losing. She then beat Sabalenka 7-6 in the third. She wound up losing to Halep yesterday. Halep, I think, beat Pegula about an hour before we just recorded today. The stats of the 23 winners and the 52 unforced errors, if you could win a match like that's great, right? But you cannot write your ticket doing that day in and day out. You got to be more consistent. Her athleticism is off the charts. There's still things that need to be cleaned up for her to make consistent deep runs in these big tournaments.
Yes, but she had a couple of, the Rybakina match, Sabalenka. She had some good wins this week before losing to Halep. So it wasn't all bad news for her. I see your point. And that's what happens, though. You just mentioned about her going after the forehand more. And when you start doing that, the unforced errors can mount a bit because you're going for bigger shots. You're taking more risks. So I get it. But you would want to believe that gap could be closed. And there would have been 35 winners and 40 unforced. And that's not so terrible. That's where it's got to become more like that. But I still see her. We've seen her, what she did at the French, the way she's playing now, the way she's carrying herself. I still think she's going to do very well in New York at the Open. I feel like she's sort of paved the way for it, and that she's ready for that now. And having done so well at Roland Garros gives her the confidence to feel like she can do it at another major. And I'm not discouraged about her at all.
I think with what she's done this year, if, like you said, if she can get that winners and unforced errors category a little bit closer, I think she can make a heck of a run in New York, and that New York crowd is going to be 100% behind her. It's just these draws. You're seeing these draws, Stephen. We talk about it all the time. These draws are ridiculously tough. I mean, ridiculously tough. But if you can somehow get in a roll and squeak by each match, see if you can get on a run.
Yeah, I just think, though, there's something about the way I just like the way she's conducting herself out there. There's a lot of poise, and she's not cocky, but she's confident. And I just see the growth in her over the course of this year. There's a lot of very good signs to me in the way she's approaching things. So, and in her case, she got a lot of matches this week. I think she's actually ready for the Open already, truthfully. And no matter what happens, is she in Cincinnati? I didn't even check to see if she's in that draw.
Yeah, she is.
Yeah.
She is. Yeah.
All right. So I mean, what if she can even get another quarter out of Cincinnati? If she got a quarter out of Cincinnati, that would be fine. Even if she didn't, I think she'll be ready in New York. She's played a lot this year, and again, you talk about crowd support. Oh. I mean, they're going to flock to her matches in New York. So the fans are going to be completely on her side. And listen, it's been a really good year for her, and may it continue.
Well, someone we haven't seen in a few weeks just arrived at Cincinnati yesterday, Friday. He was already practicing there late yesterday. He was practicing this morning. He's practicing, I think, in about an hour again. Second practice of the day, and that is Mr. Rafa Nadal. You'll know he'll be ready to go. Hopefully, he obviously is lacking matches, but he's been through this. This is not his first rodeo. He's come back from injuries before. He knows what he needs to do to prepare. It'll be interesting to see how he does in Cincinnati. I'm not too concerned. Even if he did bow out early in Cincinnati, he has so much experience. He'll be ready to roll in New York.
See, that's exactly the way he looks at it now, David. There was a stage, 10 years ago, he wouldn't have felt that way. He was so obsessed with the idea that he had to play a certain amount. He had to be match tough. He had to be match sharp. Now he's seen, to come back from playing just one tournament post French Open 2021 and losing that match in Washington. He played a couple of matches in Washington. He's gone. Right. And then to come back and play one little warm-up tournament in Melbourne prior to the Australian Open and win that, to have it really bad for him, bad French Open preparation. His whole schedule got disrupted, and then he walks off the court, limps off the court after the Shapovalov match in Rome, and he wins the French. So I think he's seen. I agree with you. If for some reason he got picked off in his first match in Cincinnati, very unlikely. I've looked at the draw; it looks very favorable. Yeah. It's not going to matter. He just would get on the practice course in New York, and there'll be plenty of time for him to play his way into New York. The big question with him is going to be, does he physically hold up? Right. Is the Wimbledon injury abdominal? Does it linger? Is his foot okay? We still worry about his foot. So there's a lot to be concerned about there. But if he's fortunate enough to avoid all that and stay healthy, then he's right in the thick of things in New York again as he goes for a fifth title, going for a fifth U.S. Open.
Incredible. Yeah, we can't wait to see how that all pans out. And we will end it with a person who I've kind of mentioned on the side the last few episodes, that there's a chance, and there's looking like it may even be a better chance. We're running out of time, but the CDC just recently adjusted some guidelines. I would not be shocked. I've said it a couple weeks now with you. If we saw Novak Djokovic in New York, I'm leaning closer to even expecting to see Novak in New York. I think I'm over the 50% line, Steve. I think I'm over the 50% line. I think we see Novak Djokovic play New York.
Okay, we have to fully disclose to our listeners, David, that you and I have been going back and forth on the text with this week, because I've been asking you what your percentage number is. Now you're telling me. Listen, I'm going to repeat what I've said in a couple of prior discussions we've had. I sincerely hope that you're right. I would love to be wrong about this. I would love to see him back there playing. And I think, frankly, he should be. But I still say the chances are very, very slim because of the CDC. I read the piece. I read all about the changes they're making and how they're but I don't see anything in there that would lead me to believe that the vaccine rule of coming into the U.S. as a foreign player is going to change, and therefore I don't like the chances. And as I say, I'd be very disappointed. I want to see him there. I want to see it. I feel like he hasn't done himself full justice in New York. Only imagine that he has 3 titles and Rafa has 4. That's surprising if you think about it, on hard courts, and Novak losing all those finals and including last year to Medvedev. So I think it would be great to see him back. I just don't see that vaccine. I don't see the solution for that, because he's not going to suddenly change his mind. So unless
he's not doing that. It would be another way that he would get in. I agree with that.
But they would have to suddenly say, no, they'd have to come up with some kind of reason to say we no longer require the vaccine. But I think that the U.S. government would be too worried about the ramifications of that, not for Djokovic, just for that rule, period.
That's right. You're spot on with that, Steve. I want to be clear about this with our listeners. And I want to be crystal clear. Both Steve and myself, we are vaccinated, but hypothetically, if Steve and I were not vaccinated and we hung out with Novak in Serbia for 2, 3, 4 weeks, we could do that. We could be unvaccinated. Again, Steve and I are vaccinated, but we could be unvaccinated, hanging out with Novak in Serbia. And Steve and I, let's say we were professionally ranked top 30 in the world, because we're Americans, we could come back in and play the US Open unvaccinated. Now, again, we are vaccinated for the 3rd time, but that's the goofy thing about it, that we as Americans, we could go hang out with Novak in Serbia. If we were unvaccinated, we can then come back in and still play. And yet anyone who's not an American citizen, they cannot do that. So that's the goofy part of this.
Yeah, and obviously that goes for the likes of Tennis Sandgren, who apparently has not had the vaccine. And so an American player could theoretically follow the scenario that you just described for us. So it's very complicated that way. It's very complicated. And Djokovic has spoken about that, and I think he's frustrated by that. But I have to say, David, he's caught so much criticism, and he did, especially in Australia. I think he's been very dignified about this. And when he talked about it at Wimbledon, I mean, his attitude is sort of like, look, I'd love to play. I hope I can play. I'll be prepared to play. But if I can't, I can't. And he just accepts the ramifications of his decision. He understands that he made a choice,
and he does not want Australia to happen again, ever again.
No, of course not. But what I mean is, he understood then as well. I remember, I think even then he was pleasantly surprised initially when he got his exemption, and thought, oh, this is great. I'm going to be able to play. I'm going over there. And then of course it all blew up. And what I mean is, he accepts the fact now as well. Well, obviously he wouldn't be coming over here looking to cause trouble. He's not going to do anything like that. And I just think, what I mean is, I think he's accepted the fact that he doesn't complain about what happened in Australia, and he doesn't complain about what appears to be what it looks like is going to happen in New York. And so he believes so strongly that he doesn't want to take that vaccine, that he's willing to give up 2 majors in 2022. And obviously we can question the judgment, and I wish he didn't feel that way. I wish he felt like he could take the vaccine, but he sure has been principled in his way to say, I'm willing to give that up. It's that important to me.
We'll see. He's running out of time, but there's some interesting developments each and every day. So we shall see. Hey, we hit on Rafa, we hit on Novak. We can't let the 3rd guy of the big 3 without mentioning him. Happy 41st birthday, Roger Federer. Happened last week, right, Steve? We're going to see him hopefully soon at Laver Cup, which, my God, Team Europe has the dream team, I guess. So happy birthday, Roger. We're all hoping to see you soon on the tennis court.
We'll see him. I'm confident that we'll see him in the doubles in Laver Cup. I'm pretty confident about that. Whether we see him in the singles in Basel, that's another story. But hopefully he'll feel like it's a test that he has to put himself through that, and that he can do it. But I'm pretty confident about Laver Cup, and that will be exhilarating for all tennis fans worldwide.
Well, I appreciate everyone's attention span. I know we hit on a lot. There was a lot to talk about, but we always try to keep it somewhat short, because we know we realize how precious everyone's time is. So, Steve, once again, Thanks. There was a lot that we could have talked about, but I think we hit on quite a bit and we did it succinctly enough where we kept everyone's interest, hopefully.
Yeah, I hope so, David. It was enjoyable, and look forward to our next one after Cincinnati.
Thanks, Steve.